welcome to our latest webinar on e-mobility fire risk. We'll get started. No doubt there'll be a few more joining, but appreciate everybody that's given their time to join us today to refresh on this really important subject, e-mobility, fire risk in social housing. I'm very grateful to Neville Tomblin and Adam Briggs, who joined us today to share some of their thoughts with us. In the usual way, please keep your mic muted for the first part of the presentation. There will be scope to ask questions and make observations towards the end. But in the meantime, please do feel very free to make comments, questions in the chat, which we'll pick up as we progress. So, as we know, e-mobility is a big concern for many landlords, and this includes e-bikes, e-scooters, as well as mobility scooters. And there's some really interesting work going on in the sector, educating residents and taking a proactive approach. And we're looking to, as always, share good practice and the things that are going on in the sector and learn from each other, because none of us know everything, but there's lots of good things that we can share and learn from. So with that, I will hand across to Neville. Thank you. Linda is very well known. We'll let him do his own introduction. Thank you very much, Neville.
Thank you, Nigel. Yep, well, this is me. As it says there, I've got 55 years of construction experience. My last 12 years with Southampton, looking after fire safety for them. And I was due to retire and decided actually that I didn't want to sit in the garden reading the newspaper or drinking wine. So I am now doing consultancy work with Fire Consultancy, which is my consultancy business, primarily delivering support on building safety cases and gateway submissions, and offering advice as and when needed. On the e-scooter situation, I've got a couple of slides that have picked up some stats that I picked up on the basis of the number of appliances there are about at the moment. There are about 500,000 mobility scooters in the country. E-scooters, there are about 750,000 of them. Thank you, Nigel. E-bikes, 550,000, and powered wheelchairs, 150,000. These were figures as of March this year, probably increasing. And the number of e-bike hires over the 12 months to September, shouldn't be 25, it's 24, 23 rather, was 25 million, which is an awful lot of e-bike hires, albeit one would assume that they are e-bikes that are maintained and serviced correctly. In terms of the issues around the electric appliances, since 2010, there's been 36 reported fires within the property for mobility scooters. E-scooters have had 19 reported fires in 2022 and 36 in 2023, all within the property. On the e-bike side of things, 74 reported fires, 43 of these were conversions, and 65% of them occurred within the property. 161 reported fires in 2023, 75 of these were post-sale bike conversions, which is 67% within the property. Just moving on from that, before we go to the next slide, Nigel, I did see an article earlier this week about a house fire in Coventry that was actually caused by a bike converted into an e-bike. It was in a maisonette. The e-bike was actually stored in the entrance lobby of the maisonette, was left on charge overnight, caught fire, major fire in the maisonette, and 2 people died. So obviously, you know, there is a major issue around dealing with mobility scooters, mobility bikes, etc., and ensuring that they're safely stored, safely charged. If you can move on to the next slide, Nigel. And this is another issue as well, that even without a fire, if you get a battery failure, you can get a significant amount of gas coming from the battery. There can be a high risk of explosion and the toxic gases. And because the gas that comes out is lighter than heavier than air, you can have a delayed vapor cloud explosion, and you can have a risk to occupants in respect to the toxic substances. The solution obviously is to secure external storage away from the occupied building, but there are issues around that, which I'm sure we'll discuss later on. But primarily, from my experience at Southampton, where we built some external scooter stores, they weren't used by a number of residents who'd got mobility scooters, because they argued that they then got to walk from the scooter store to their flat, and if they've got mobility issues, that caused them a problem in terms of carrying their shopping or whatever. There has been issued by the National Fire Chief Council a mobility scooter guidance, and on the slide here you can see the link to it. That is a very useful document. It actually talks about what you can do in various situations in terms of providing storage, what you should be advising residents to do around charging, not charging, where you should store them, etc., and how to make them safe. And that really was my take on this. Very short summary. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions after Adam's done his long presentation. So any questions, obviously, we'll pick up at the end.
Yeah, thank you, Neville. And I think it's really important what you've highlighted there on the type of devices that are, leading to the majority of the events, because again, I think that's something that's going to come up quite
the other thing, Nigel, in fact, that I didn't mention, I picked up this morning actually, is these hover scooters as well. And there's been a couple of fires with the hover scooters. So yes. I think anything that has a lithium battery in it is potentially a risk.
Yes, I agree. And people often say, well, what about, laptops and phones? And of course, fires do occur with devices like that too. But the risk around e-mobility is their vulnerability to damage. The fact that the sale of them is uncontrolled at the moment. And we're in an environment where there's quite a lot of people that are actually building their own or replacing components with non-OEM components and putting themselves at considerable risk.
Yeah.
So that's
buying them second hand where you don't know how they've been maintained, etc., is another issue. I think it's very difficult. It's very difficult for landlords to actually try and manage that process and control it, and try and make sure that when a resident buys some sort of mobility appliance, whether it's a scooter, a bike, a mobility scooter, a hover, whatever it is, how to actually ensure that they're doing the proper checks when they buy it.
Yes, I agree. And thank you, Neville. That's really helpful. Right, we're going to hand over to Adam now to give a bit of detail on how at Citizen the rubber hits the road, so to speak. So, Adam, over to you.
Rubber hits the road. I like it, because we need to be a bit quick doing this, don't I? Because there's about 130 slides. Morning, all. For anyone who doesn't know me or isn't aware, my name's Adam. I've got 17 years experience working in fire safety management, and I'm currently working with Citizen as the head of fire safety and high risk buildings. We're currently looking into or conducting the submission of the building safety cases to the building safety regulator, and effectively all things fire safety for the higher risk buildings, and also mid-rise buildings and low-rise buildings as well. So we're working with customers, local authorities and residents to make sure we're engaging with them and making sure that they're at the forefront of our approach to fire safety. I think what Neville mentioned earlier on in relation to the NFCC guidance and all the issues that have been reported previously, I think ultimately the objective is to keep people safe. we've taken the route of creating a guidance document, and Neville alluded to the NFCC guidance, which I'm more than happy to drop in afterwards. I'll drop in the link to the guidance in the chat if anyone hasn't seen it yet, or hasn't looked at it in great detail. But we're looking at making sure that we're keeping people safe in relation to our into our guidance. So we've put some guidance together, and we're already, without it being published, so to speak, we're already dealing with it on a case by case basis. So what I've had to do is we've had to get the buy-in of all areas of Citizen. So the neighbourhood officers team, the estates team, the cleaning team, executive leadership team, anyone who is front facing with a customer, to try and gather as much information as we can and refer it to us so we can offer that guidance to the customer on a case by case basis. So what we'll do is we've written the guidance in relation to having the Class 1 and Class 2 mobility scooters, or e-mobility devices, that are allowed to be stored within the properties, or within the purpose-built blocks. But the Class 3, because they're roadworthy, and we're saying that we're not allowing them internally into the flats. So that's our ongoing approach. We're also advising our customers to seek permission before purchasing a mobility scooter, e-bike or e-scooter where possible. That's understandable. There are challenges there in relation to people not necessarily they might make the decision off the cuff to purchase one, and then it might be retrospective. But we want to be able to create that communication with our customers as the earliest possible point. Ensure appropriate guidance for safe storage and e-mobility devices is provided. That's our approach again. Prevent accident incidents, near misses occurring. Comply with regulations in relation to Article 14 of the Regulatory Reform Order, and also the Fire Safety Act 2021. Maintain a safe place for people to live, and where this guidance applies to, and mitigate the fire risk. All this collates to actually reducing the risk, getting as many people to buy into the idea that we're actually managing it on a day-to-day basis, and we're looking at the ways that we can reduce the risk within our properties to make our customers safer within their homes. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've got obviously we talk about the NFCC guidance. If you read through that, it gives you the 7 options. And one of the caveats that I'll say to this presentation and to Citizen's approach, we're not here to reinvent the wheel. If we could, we would, and we could make it safer, and it would be a lot of, as in a way where we can make it safer, and all the questions that people have, if we could answer all the questions, that would be fantastic. But what we're doing is we're using the NFCC guidance as a kind of a backstop in going back to that, and then you can identify the options available. So the options available that we have is external storage without charging. Speaks for itself. It's outside the property. It's outside, and it's within either within a unit itself, a purpose-built unit like Metro Store. Then we have got the external storage with charging. Obviously comes with other risks as well, but again, the risk is reduced within the living quarters because it is outside the property. Then we've got purpose-built internal storage. So an area has been identified, and we can and an area has been constructed to house e-mobility devices and charge them in there as well. Adapt internal storage. So we've got an area that's identified. We can look at that and we can adapt what we need to do. So we can put detection in there, potentially suppression if required, if that's identified. But then we've got that place already in the block. Existing fire resistant room utilised for storage. So that's an area that is already used for storage, but we can relocate or reallocate that to e-mobility storage. And then we've got the storing and charging within residents' own accommodation. Now, if you look at this in relation to how it's set out, if you look at where we've started outside the building and then we've gone inside the building, when we've talked about taking on a case-by-case basis, we're actually looking at speaking to the customer and finding out what their needs are, understanding that we're actually reducing the risk as low as reasonably practicable. There are elements where we won't be able to completely eliminate the actual issue. So firstly, we speak to the customer, we identify what their current storage looks like, whether or not that's suitable, because we have got some customers who have already identified certain areas to store their mobility scooter, and it's been deemed judged acceptable. But if again we talk about discuss and agree solutions in relation to where we can go with it. So firstly, we'll look at can we suitably and sufficiently store that e-mobility device within the property? Is it can it be stored within an area that's can be ventilated and be charged when it's closed away? And we'll discuss and agree a way forward with the customer. We'll also talk about the planned work, what's actually needed to make that area suitable and sufficient for the storage to go ahead, and then we'll talk about the timeframes as well. So we'll discuss and agree the timeframes. The other thing that we'll do is we'll look at any temporary things that need to be put in place until that final solution is looked at. So we'll carry out the necessary work. We'll sign off the storage and charging facility. It says notify and train the customer, but what we're trying to do there is we're trying to notify the customers to this is your new storage unit and this is how we want you to use it. If you need any advice or guidance based on that, let us know straight away. So we're opening that channel of communication, and we're monitoring the solution as well. So we're going to inform the customer, and we're doing this already. We're informing the customer that we've got a solution for them, and they're using the solution, but we're constantly speaking to them. Not every day, I wouldn't say, but we're constantly speaking to them to make sure that the solution is working for them and it remains safe. So when we're assessing what the customer needs, and I'm conscious that I am speaking a little bit fast here, so this will be you'll be able to watch it back and be able to reduce the speed. Fixed wiring installation testing. We'll make sure that that's been done. Portable appliance testing for the equipment and for any charging cables that are connected to the unit to make sure they're acceptable. Fire detection is maintenance and testing is in place. Emergency lighting and signage where required. Ventilation requirements within the separate units if we've got any units that we've identified. Then we inspect the passive fire protection, i.e. fire doors, floors, walls, ceilings, to make sure that those provisions are acceptable. And ultimately, we're looking at keeping people safe. So when we talk about the additional works that are doing, we're not just doing the works because we think it's going to be okay, we think it's going to be suitable and sufficient. It all leads back to keeping people safe and making sure that they're aware that they've got a responsibility as well. So based on the decision, when we've made a decision, we make the decision with the customer at the forefront of our decision, and we based on the 7 options or the 6 options, because I merged 2 of them, we communicate that with the customer and make them aware of their responsibility, as I mentioned before. Ultimately, we're looking to maintain the safety of persons living, visiting and operating within the buildings. Dealing with each customer on a customer basis is important, because then we'll understand what we've already got in place that can be suitable and sufficient, or what we need to do to actually make that the area safe to store. So learning points from recent fires, as Neville mentioned with regards to the fire that happened in Coventry, continue to work and provide awareness on the dangers of e-bikes and e-scooters. Make sure we continue that information circular. Make sure that it's available in different languages through various formats. That is imperative. We cannot expect for a single point of communication to be the best way for everyone. So we need to open that up, and we have done already with our resident engagement strategies. Offer consultation on safe storage of mobility devices. Kind of open the floor, so to speak, with our customers. Open our door and say, look, we're here if you need to speak to us about it. Almost like an amnesty. If anybody has got a converted bike and they want to speak to us about it, or so to open that dialogue is important. Empower members of citizen to act and behave in a way that won't lead to fires. Provide a drop-in session for customers and queries, like I just mentioned, and to consider reasonable adjustments on our approach to make sure that we've identified all the vulnerabilities of our customers is key. Okay, so as I mentioned to you before, we've got our document here, e-bikes, e-scooters storage guidance. And if you look at its draft review, this document here was written 18 months ago. Now, one of the things is that we've already started to imply the guidance that's within this document already. That's probably one of the reasons why we're here, and we've got lots of learning points in relation to it. But the timeline for publication for this is obviously we need to speak to our senior leadership team, our executive leadership team. We need to consult with the Customer Assurance Committee to make sure that they're aware of the guidance itself and what we're actually doing, and then publish. And as we mentioned here, we're already working with this guidance, and it's not reinventing the wheel. It goes back to the NFCC guidance, so we're actually all working off the same point of contact. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Adam. It was really helpful to set that out. Shortly open up to the floor for questions. I'd got one question for you, Adam, and that's really to ask you to confirm that although the NFCC guidance as written for mobility scooters, you consider this to be sort of applicable to all e-mobility devices to a greater or lesser extent. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things where we all understand the ways and means of mobility scooters and why they were put on this planet, and to allow people, to give people the freedom to leave their homes. And I think it has been easy to say that people with e-scooters and e-bikes, they're a little bit less important, which I wouldn't say that is the case, because people rely upon them for their livelihood. And so it's important that we encapsulate that in the guidance itself and move forward with that, because people do need these devices, so they will use them, and it is important that it's important that we do encapsulate that. So that's why we've opened communication. We've put communication on our electronic notice boards within the blocks where we've got electronic notice boards to actually get people to engage with us about these devices.
That's good, thank you. Now my second, and I'd be interested in thoughts of you both on this, is that guidance is pretty clear around not storing charging devices in common areas. Would you say that you're not looking at that only, but you're also cognizant of what residents may have within their flats because of the scale of the risk and the potential consequences. How we actually, how that flows out in terms of a policy is perhaps not easy to define, but we have that sort of responsibility to towards our residents and customers. What would you say on that, Neville?
I think the problem is that once they're behind closed doors, there's not a lot you can do about how they act and react. And it is their home. All you can do is try and offer the best advice. I mean, what we did at Southampton is we actually got Hampshire Fire and Rescue to do a residents meeting on some of the blocks with us, where they explained the dangers, etc. I mean, it is quite difficult because obviously some of these flats can be quite small, so the areas available to store them can be quite difficult. The entrance lobby tends to be the main place that people tend to store them, which of course is the means of escape out of the flat if there's a fire. I mean, you can do a couple of things around that. There is a fire cover that goes over mobility scooters now that will actually contain anything that might happen to the mobility scooter. That obviously doesn't work for some of the others like e-bikes and e-wheelchairs and e-scooters. And I think one of the other problems is that whilst you can, and Adam's presentation and what Citizen do is brilliant, you can tell a resident as many times as you like that they shouldn't be charging the bike overnight or the appliance overnight. They shouldn't allow it to get to 100% charge. They should unplug it. They should switch it off. But by and large, that doesn't happen. I mean, I know from my own experience for what I do, I should unplug stuff overnight, but I don't. And yet, theoretically, I'm supposed to be sensible about fire safety. So it is difficult.
I think Neville, I think you've touched on a really good thing there in relation to the effect that we're actually having on customers is speaking to them, and it's kind of a change of culture. I think one of the good things I think in this presentation, we've not gone back to the elements of what happened in 2017 with regards to Grenfell. We're actually identifying where we are now. We're actually drawing a line in the sand and saying, look, these are challenges that we've got, and we need to be able to make sure that we're communicating with the customers. And it is a change of culture. We always said that the fire safety changes in the legislation in 2021, 2022 and onwards has been a massive change of culture for all involved, and that also includes the customer, the resident, that they've got a responsibility as well, and it's kind of like opening those channels of communication is key, because then we've got that we can work together on that change of culture, and it's not just a one-way force of we want you to do this, we want you to do that for X, Y, and Z reasons. It's a massive challenge, but it's one that I feel that we're facing on a daily basis, which is we're facing it head on.
It's difficult as well, Adam. I mean, one of the things that we looked at Southampton, and I know you've looked at it as well, is actually providing, free pack testing for the chargers, etc., which is great for those people that have actually got a genuine charger. Those that have gone onto eBay and bought a £5 Chinese knockoff don't want it pack tested because they know it's going to fail.
No.
And the same with an e-bike conversion. You do your own e-bike conversion. You don't want it pack tested because the likelihood is it won't pass.
I think the other danger as well is that you've actually got where you've got a customer that doesn't have an e-bike, doesn't have an e-mobility device or anything like that, but then they've got a visitor that comes along, and it's educating the customers that if they're bringing that danger into the property, is that the dangers that can be that can come from that as well.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a change of culture as well, which is quite difficult, isn't it?
It is. And I've just seen a post in the chat that Leah Winters has put on about new builds where they've actually designed a storage cupboard in the flats with charging points right on the escape route by the flat entrance door, and not ventilated or with a fire door on. And that, I think the problem is that at design stage, sometimes some of the designers don't understand the implications or the risks around things like mobility scooters and where you store them. I know that we did a sheltered scheme in Southampton, and the design allowed for a charging point for a dedicated charging point for the mobility scooter in the lobby. Well, it's directly in the means of escape.
Yeah.
So there's a clear need for much greater awareness at all levels, isn't there, within an organisation, from the landlord, the staff, the residents, but then also the designers of new properties.
Just on that. Sorry, Nigel. Just to jump in there, that's something that I've been exploring. Well, not exploring, actually carrying out, is that meeting with the design teams and the regeneration teams in relation to new properties that we'll be obtaining, making sure that that's been assessed at the earliest possible point, so that information that comes across with the package has actually been assessed. So we're actually hitting the ground running when we're getting these new properties, and we can pick those little nuances up before the handover.
That's crucial.
One of the problems is as well, Nigel, that I came across was that designers think they know best.
Yes. One question from Helen before we go to the floor. Helen Tucker, she's asking, Adam, did you have any situations where none of those options were suitable, and then how did you deal with that?
Good question. Really good question. We haven't had, as of yet, any issues where we've not been able to fit it into one of those slots. However, what I will say, one of the challenges that have been is that it's not always been the first choice of solution that's been utilised, and that's why we've identified that communicating with the customer and getting buy-in from the customer as well, that's the way forward and the reasons why. So yeah, it is a challenge, but we've had to like look at it in a way that how we approach it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, good, thank you. Right, question from Dino. Dino Davies got his hand up. Dino, far away.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm from Jersey in the Channel Islands. We currently have no fire legislation over here at the moment, but we're doing our best to keep abreast of the mainland legislation, albeit the regulatory reform and the Fire Safety Act, etc. We also have a massive issue amongst our clientele, because we are Jersey's largest housing provider, with the self-prescribed mobility scooters. So basically anybody can walk into a shop and get one now, and we also have the abundance of issues that come with it. We're currently considering putting a 1.5 by 1.5 lithium blanket in each of our high-rise apartments. I know that might seem extravagant to you guys, but I think the issues that we're currently having at the moment might be a good idea. I just want to know what you think about that.
I think I think it's a good solution if you can afford to do it. And I think that the trouble is that probably most social landlords wouldn't have the budget to put that sort of situation into every general needs flat or supported block flat that they've got. It is difficult to try and find a solution that sort of is if you like outside of the norm, and it is difficult as well, because again one of the things that we were talking about earlier was you can have a block of flats with 100 flats in there. You don't know how many people within that will have a mobility scooter, and you can make an allowance for X number, but what do you do when more people then take them? And one of the things that I've noticed is they're becoming more of a social thing now as well, in that some people will actually have a mobility scooter, not because they're disabled and therefore are unable to walk from wherever, but more that as you get older, it's a convenience for you.
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
potentially there's a flip side to that, that some people are actually choosing e-mobility devices instead of a car. So there is actually a sustainable travel element to this, which we should actually be trying to encourage, albeit not put lives, at a greater risk. I've seen a recommendation recently, people putting a blanket over the device every time they, not because there's a fire, but as a precaution, which in some ways seems a good idea in terms of it's reducing the risk and perhaps buying you time. But I'd say if it is a lithium-ion battery, we do need to be aware that one of the first things that's going to happen is off-gassing. So you've got these toxic gases, which a blanket's not going to clearly do anything to prevent. And you only have seconds to, get out of the flat, and you certainly shouldn't be looking to actually fight that fire. In some cases, with a delayed ignition, you could actually be getting an explosion. So I think it could potentially reduce the risk, but depending on the scale and nature and the way that event pans out, it might not help you very much.
That is a good point. But I think because a lot of people, like you mentioned earlier, are charging their batteries in the escape route of their flats. We're looking at more of a point of just being able to give yourself some time to escape and leave if the battery does catch fire. So it's just like put it over. It's giving me an escape route to get out.
Are you talking about not actually putting the blanket over the mobility scooter, actually putting it over the mobility scooter if it catches fire?
Well, time dictating and panic, I should imagine.
I think that's dangerous because the speed of ignition with them and the speed of toxic fumes is so quick that actually you need to get out. You don't need to try and get the blanket out of its case and get it over the scooter. I think if you did that, the likelihood is you would pass out from the fumes and probably end up dead.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's one point as well, because most people who see a fire in their escape route will just return back to the kitchen or to another room. I think it just gives them an option possibly, because they're also like the old fire blankets that they used to supply in kitchens as well, where they're just on two tags which pulls out. So there's no flapping about with cupboards and locks and things like that.
Interesting point there. That's good. I've got a couple of questions from Jan, which I can either read out. Well, the first one is whether we've had any pressure coming from insurers, whether that's the landlord's insurance or the individual's insurance. Adam, have you come across anything on that?
Haven't come across anything in relation to it being mentioned from internally, but I do know that we've explored in relation to going to insurance companies off our own bat and actually speaking to them about how we're actually combating the issue and how we're looking at on an individual basis. So I can't answer that as direct really, but that's what we're looking at doing. Because again, that shows that we're proactive and it's not something that's, oh well, we might do it. It's actually going to be written into a document that's what we're actually looking at, how we're looking at managing that risk.
Adam, are you able to hear me now?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, sorry. Just to amplify that, my point really was that if you're driving a piece of kit on the roads, then you need insurance outside anyway. And my point was really whether you've talked about guidance, but whether you've actually converted that guidance into a policy in line with your own tenancy conditions. Because if you're able to then say to the owner, look, it's okay as long as you've got the correct insurance, that insurance surely should also then take account if a fire does occur, that the insurance covers liability for the rest of the building.
Yeah.
Can I come in there, Adam? Just
Yeah.
quickly. At Southampton, Jan, we looked at doing that, and we started to look at whether we could actually make it a condition of somebody seeking approval for a mobility scooter had to have insurance for the mobility scooter, but it was considered that it was going to be quite difficult to manage, so the housing team didn't actually go ahead with it. They felt that it was basically an imposition on residents when in fact it's not a legal requirement to insure them. And it never went ahead. I think it was a bad move because I think insuring it obviously is a good idea. The downside of that is, or not the downside, but if they do a conversion or if they actually buy a cheap Chinese battery, would that invalidate the insurance? It's
I listen. I understand that point entirely, and we have to continue to make the point between the conversions and the cheapos and the legitimate e-bikes and stuff that cost a fortune, but where in fact there has been no record of fires occurring at all because they've been properly constructed and the batteries are properly constructed, and that's the challenge for us as landlords. But what just come back? I saw you smile, Adam, when I mentioned policy. Where are you in Citizen between the guidance and the need for a policy?
Yeah, well, this guidance note, the reason why I smiled is because the guidance note actually started off life as a policy.
Okay.
As in, and then it was a case of, I suppose it's the old adage of running before we could walk. It was kind of like, well, actually, really, we have actually got this is an issue now, as in we've got people who need that guidance. So we thought we would write the guidance, and then the policy and the governance side of it would come like towards the end of getting this together. So it isn't for lack of trying, and we are, like I say, we are on with it, and it's going pretty well. But what we'll have is, hopefully, we'll have the guidance will be a complete document, and then we'll have the policy side of it, which will be knitted into the tenancy conditions, etc. And the customers will be educated on that and communicated on that as well. So it's a little bit of tortoise and hare at the moment. And I know it shouldn't be. It should be aligned, but that's where we're at with it. But yeah, I smiled because it was a written policy to start with, and then it was like, actually, we need it to be a guidance, because we want to understand that customers come first in relation to, we need to advise them on what's happening, but also we need to educate the different areas of the organisation, so that if they come in contact with these challenges, that they know where the guidance is and what the guidance would tell them. So we've got neighbourhood officers now that will look into mobility scooters being stored in particular areas of flats when we're actually doing the tenancy management checks. Therefore, they can say, well, actually, we can offer these elements of these solutions in line with the guidance, and they've got that information already to hand. So it was kind of like, hopefully that's answered your question. But yeah, that's why I smiled when you said that.
I think the other issue is as well, Jan, is that you can look at getting residents to insure the scooters. I mean, my experience is that a large proportion of social housing residents don't have contents insurance either. Absolutely. So if they haven't got contents insurance, they're hardly likely to go out and get insurance for a mobility scooter. And you say mobility scooters, what about e-scooters? What about e-bikes? What about those e-wheelchairs? Do you widen it out, or do you just restrict it to mobility scooters?
Well, I think that's part of the debate, because quite clearly, if you're on a piece of kit that as you're driving on a road or on a pavement, if you knock somebody over as an individual, you ought to insure yourself, because you're likely to be in trouble if you're not. I'll just one more question, then I'll shut up, and that was about the PAT testing. If in both your cases, have you had an occasion where something has been PAT tested and has failed? And then what do you do if it fails?
Well, I can only speak from my experience in Southampton, where we were asked by a resident to pat test one of their chargers for their mobility scooter, and it failed. And there was an issue with the mobility scooter, and we actually would not let them keep the mobility scooter within the flat. We actually physically had to move it out because it was a risk, and they were told that they had to actually either get the mobility scooter fully maintained so that it was operational, and also to get a charger that would pass a pat test.
And presumably that would tie in. I mean, depending on, well, it doesn't depend where the property is, but Section 95 of the Building Safety Act, of course, covers that point, doesn't it? About preventing residents bringing something into a building that might compromise fire safety.
Yeah, but but that's a great clause, Jan, but it's very difficult to enforce. You're lucky if you come across a situation where you can do something about that. Because by and large, you have no idea of what they're actually bringing into their flat. As I say, and once that front door's closed, it's very difficult to get in and have a look. There's a whole range of things, not just about this. You know, you've obviously got issues about other things they might bring into the house, into the flat as well. But yeah, it's a tricky one to know what to do. And I mean, we looked, I know as Adam's done, we looked at providing pat testing as across the piece, but because of the resistance from residents, because they didn't want something pat tested, whether it was a mobility scooter, whether it's a washing machine, whether it was their tumble dryer, or or their microwave, they didn't want it pat tested, because if it failed, we'd ask them to remove it.
Yes, and I listen. I understand that. Listen, I've taken up too much time. I'll shut up and listen to others.
Thank you, Anne. Appreciate your contributions. I was just going to make a point on pat testing. It's pretty well known that really you can only test the charger and you can't test the device. Whilst it may be the charger that could be potentially overcharging and causing a thermal runaway event at some point in the future, and it might help you identify that. There's clearly a lot of risks associated, potential risk defects associated with the device itself. So checking for signs of physical damage, the fact that the battery or the charger may have been replaced, things like that. There are quite a few simple checks that you could do to identify what is a high risk item, and then you're straight back to that point that Jan's raised. What do we do then? And appreciate, guys, what you've set out there. Ian, you've had your hand up for so long, you must have pins and needles. Not ignoring you deliberately. Ian, far away.
Yeah, my arm's starting to hurt, to be honest, Nigel. Guys, I think really excellent presentations. I think a lot of us are probably, doing the same type of thing, version. You kind of covered some of the things that I wanted to mention, particularly you, Neville, in terms of, property size, and you sort of take the risk out of the communal areas, but you increase the risk by putting it into the flats, particularly where you've got vulnerable people in properties that there's probably an argument to say whether they're fit for purpose anymore in terms of housing single vulnerable adults. And you just about started to touch on the topic that I wanted to raise with you guys, which was about, we could all have these policies, procedures, we can have the guidance. There is law and legislation around it, but as you said, Neville, it is so difficult to enforce and police. We've removed several mobility scooters, and it's kind of you feel you're denying that resident their right to access to their property, because they won't be able to get in and out of their property. And we've kind of sort of gone back to our allocations team to sort of say, well, you've got to kind of ask the question again. Particular case we had, I won't target the block or anything, but somebody on the 8th floor whose only access was through a mobility scooter, and you kind of think, well, he should have been housed there. So yeah, we got a PEP set up. You can do all those things, but you still can't ensure what's going on. And if that, they'll know that the caretaker comes round on a Tuesday, so all the items go indoors, out of sight, out of mind, and they all come back out into the communal area. So just, have you gone to that extreme? I know you mentioned, Neville, that you removed somebody's unsafe device or charger. But any more experience of how you've gone about that?
We have sorry to jump in, Neville, but we have it where that if we notice something that's in the communal space, we'll communicate with that customer immediately by way of knocking on the door, explaining that there's an issue, and ultimately giving them a period of time. I say a period of time, it's a short period of time to remove that item from that means of escape area, and communicate with them in relation to where they can potentially store it, which is safe. So if it's in their flat, looking at a particular area where they can close it in somewhere and make sure it's closed away, or if it's somewhere else within the block. Sorry, carry on.
Sorry to come back at you. I mean, we've done that, and sometimes we back that up with the letter. Sometimes it's difficult to identify which particular resident that no matter what, whether it's an e-bike, an e-scooter, a mobility scooter, they won't change that. But we found as well, after 2 or 3 days, it's back out there. So we had to, we don't do the door knocking anymore, because we find it's a bit of a waste of time, and we will just go ahead and remove them. I write to all our residents or all our tenants and leaseholders, and there's every 18 months, 2 years, and there's also a paragraph in there that says to our leaseholders, if you sublet your property, you're liable for any recharges. We remove them, we put them into storage, and go from there. But it was kind of dealing with that difficult thing, particularly with sort of somebody's mobility scooters, because for a lot of people they can't get out and about. I mean, when I send the letter out, I do get quite a number of calls from residents, and we do have to kind of say, well, you can't do this and you can't do that, you can't do the other, and we appreciate it's very difficult, but if you don't do that, we're going to take it away.
I think you have to be quite hard-nosed about it, Ian, because obviously if they're leaving mobility scooters or e-bikes or e-scooters in the communal corridors, then they are putting other people at risk, because they're obviously putting something flammable into a sterile area, and of course, in that respect, the fact it's there is putting the landlord in breach of the legislation as well, albeit not through their own fault. At Southampton, they had a policy a bit like you were saying, of if it was there and they didn't know whose flat it was, they would remove it. It would be taken away. If it was somebody who consistently did it, then they would get a notice of intended action, with possible looking at removing the tenancy from them if it was a consistent thing. So they were taking a fairly hard-nosed approach to it, and where they could, they would offer, very much like Adam did, advice about where you could or couldn't do it. I think there's a bit of a risk about advising a resident where in the flat they can keep it, because then you're taking a level of responsibility.
Yeah, we've found that as well, because when those discussions are being had, and you don't blame a resident for coming back and saying, where am I supposed to put it? The regulations about where it can be put outside are really quite difficult as well, because they've got, as you say, 5 meters from the building. Sometimes isn't practical, and where, when, and how do they recharge it?
Mm.
And also it brings up the other sort of like issue of leaving them on a flat balcony, where again it can cause the fire to spread
Yeah.
quite rapidly.
Mm.
But no, thanks guys.
No, some really great points there. Thanks, Ian.
I mean, just moving on from Ian's comment anyway, I noticed that Laura put a comment in the chat about one of her tenants has got a mobility scooter, and she stores it under the stairwell, but she actually charged it by running a cable out of her letterbox, which you know, all of that is totally in contrary to the legislation.
Yeah, agreed.
And whilst it's a difficult thing to do, we should basically be saying, sorry, you can't do that, remove it.
Yeah, we've got that with e-vehicles as well.
Yeah. Okay, we're drawing quite close to our cut-off. Got one more contributor. Ruma, do you want to come in there?
Hi, Nigel. Thank you very much, everyone. I think there is something to learn from how New York are dealing with the risk. I don't know if most of you are following what's going on there. Obviously, New York being one of the epicenter for fire risk with micromobility devices, e-bikes, or e-scooters. And one of the things NYCHA, who are one of the biggest landlord in New York, they're basically piloting an outdoor charger solution as a viable and short-term medium solution to address this risk. Now, from what I can see, the stats speaks a lot of volume. This approach, their approach is working, because compared to the stats from last year, a lot of the fires a lot of the fire incidents have actually reduced. And one of the things they're doing is apart from just providing outdoor charging solutions, their tenants have to pay for the electricity to be able to charge their devices using the storage solution. However, what NYCHA would do, which I think is very clever, is they're actually incentivizing the tenants with free charging credits in exchange for actually registering their device for regular monthly safety checks. And this obviously allows them to one, regulate, and two, enforce safer practices within within their buildings. Now, going back to one of the questions that someone raised, what happens if there is an issue. Now, part of those monthly checks, okay, is if there is an issue with any of this device, okay, the actual tenant are provided with the resources to actually allow them to trade in that device for a safer one. Okay, and this is something that is actually proven. It's worked, and most of you would have seen some of the headlines that what they're now doing now is trying to roll that model more nationwide. I think they've the mayor thinking, like, I think it's a £2 million or £3 million trading program. But I think there is a lot to learn from how they're actually dealing with it. For us in the.
I think that's thank you, Ruma. We've probably not got time to expand that in huge detail today, but I think that's a really interesting subject to pick up on another session.
Very quickly, Nigel. I read the article about that as well, which is great. The unfortunate thing with our sector is concerned is that most local authorities are extremely under the cosh financially and wouldn't be able to afford to do it, in simple terms. Interesting.
We'll keep that for another discussion then, I think. So just to wrap up from our side, I think what this is suggesting, or certainly confirming for me, is, look, we've really got to keep on with the education and raising awareness. We can then start to get a handle on where those risks are, and we can start to have conversations about reducing that risk. If we decide that we can't store safety within the flat, then we've got to look at other areas. So that's a very simplistic sort of view, but we've got to keep on, on that journey. Secondly, just to signpost everyone to a resource area that we've set up on the Metrodor website. We've got resources that you could use to help with that education and awareness process. There's also a number of the previous webinars that you can dip into, and of course, if you do need external charging solutions, then you know where to come. That's very much what we do. Neville, if there was one thing that you wanted people to take away from this session, what would you say that is?
I think it's the difficulty of engaging with residents and getting residents to accept their responsibilities in terms of ensuring that they have got safe appliances and that they are storing them safely as well, and how we deal with that, and what actions we can put in place to assist them without taking the big stick to them, and try and work with them to make the situation safer.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you. We'll also be setting up another online session in February. If there's any particular subjects, topics, aspects of this that you'd like to make sure we cover, please pop that in the chat, and we'll all communicate with me between now and then, and we'll do our best to pick those up. Our aim is to keep on, running sessions like this to share ideas, share good practice, what's working, maybe not what's not working. But I think really important that we keep moving forward with this conversation. So extremely grateful for everybody who's given time to attend. Very grateful indeed to Neville and Adam for what they've put into the session. And thank you, and have a great day.